It's a Monday in the middle of July. Let's talk about how TCU would have won the 2014 national championship, and we'll do it on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right. Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're right there at 700 subscribers, which is really cool. We want to keep pushing that. And then also you can find us wherever it is you get podcasts in its audio form if you like to listen to podcasts the old-fashioned way with your family, huddled around a radio device. Just kidding, even though it's funny how many podcasts now have pivoted to YouTube, as has the Locked On Network. And happy to have you either viewing this or listening to it. So, over the weekend, I didn't plan on talking about this today, but I was hanging out. I think it was Saturday night. I was just sitting around watching TV, and somebody tweeted at me, Sonny Dykes Burner, which is a good account that interacts with the show. Sometimes he's a little critical of me, but that's okay. That's part of it. He tweets at me and says, when are we getting the biggest what-ifs in TCU football history? Or what's more likely in the 2023 football season podcast episodes. And this is like at 8 o'clock on a Saturday. And so I just kind of made a joke of like, hey, I've had a couple rum and cokes tonight. I'm not recording anything this evening. Obviously, I got what he was saying. He was just throwing out some content ideas. Appreciate that. You can always do that at Simcox Steven, or the show's at Locked On TCU. If you have an idea for a show topic, or you want me to talk about something specifically, I will try to work it in. But I, communicated with him a little bit. I was tweeting back and forth with people, and I eventually just put up this tweet because people were coming at me with like what the biggest what if was in TCU football history. And finally I said, okay, just let me know. What is it? What's your biggest what if for the TCU football program and, the time you followed them? And I got a lot of great responses. And so we're going to start with maybe the most obvious one. I guess it kind of depends on how long you follow the team and sort of where you are. But I feel like if you ask that question to most TCU fans, the most popular response, at least it's the one I got, and I think if you, poll a large number of them, the most popular response would be if they hung on and beat Baylor in 2014 and presumably went on to go undefeated. Or I guess what would happen if they hung on to win that game? You're at 58-37 after Marcus Mallett has a pick six. We all know what happens. And more specifically, there was a play on 4th and 3. TCU's at Baylor's 45-yard line. The offense had really stalled out in the fourth quarter of that game, but they were moving a little bit. 4th and 3 on Baylor's side of the field. And I remember standing there with my friend. I was at McLean Stadium. I'm standing there with my friend Graydon. And Graydon, who was like, Graydon's typically pretty aggressive when it comes to sports. Like as a fan, like what he wants people to do. He wants coaches to go for it. He wants them to go get it. But he was like, man, we should punt this ball. Punt the ball, pin Baylor deep. And I turned to him like, if you punt the ball, the game's over. Like in my mind, the way the Baylor offense was humming at that point in the game, the defense was gassed. I just thought if they punted the ball, the game was over. So I thought this was the right move to go for it, get the first down, hopefully, move into field goal range. There's like a minute 20 left on the clock. Trayvon Boykin throws a fade to Josh Doxson on the sidelines. Doxson gets mugged. There's no flag. TCU goes on to lose the game. Baylor takes over. They, get a couple first downs, kick a field goal, win it 61-58. We all know. We all know what happens. TCU made a lot of mistakes in that game that cost them that game, right? They're up by 21 points. But the age-old question is, if pass interference is called there, and TCU gets the ball at the Baylor 30-yard line with 1:18 left, well within field goal range for Jaden Oberchrome. Baylor did have 3 timeouts, but you feel pretty good in that scenario. I mean, best case scenario for Baylor is they get the ball back down by 3 with a minute left. And with that offense, they could definitely get into field goal range, but it would have put TCU in a great position to win the game. I have not revisited this game much since it happened. I remember Fox Sports Net, which is now Bally Sports, they used to have, I thought one of the best things they did, which I don't know if they still do this in some form or fashion, but it was called Big 12 in 60 minutes or something like that. And they would condense these Big 12 games into an hour, presentation. And you could just watch it. You could watch basically the whole game in 1 hour. It was fantastic. And I've seen the Baylor game come up, in the past, flipping through the channels or just watching Fox Sports Net. And I've always had to turn it away. I haven't, there's tons of YouTube compilations of highlights from that game or just the full game itself. I can't bring myself to go back and watch it. But I watched some of it yesterday and then this morning to prepare for this. And it's been a while since I saw that specific play that people are talking about. But yeah, I mean, the corner or the linebacker that's covering Doxson, his head is buried in his chest. Like he's totally turned away from Trey, who's throwing the football. He's not looking at the ball. And he just kind of barrels into him. There was no call. It should have been a pass interference call. Now, was that the reason they lost the football game? No, but it definitely would have made a difference in the football game if they won. And so if we're going to play out the scenario, what happens if they actually win this game? That 2014 team was dominant. Now, I'm not going to say they didn't have some close calls because they did. We all know what happened in Morgantown, West Virginia. Had to hit a field goal at the buzzer to win that game 31-30, and things looked pretty dire for the majority of that football game. Just barely escaped on the road against Kansas and what was their worst performance of the season. But Cam Eccles-Looper had a huge punt return for a touchdown in the fourth quarter and propelled them to victory 34-30. That was a horrific Kansas team. No idea what happened. Well, pretty obvious what happened. They went in there, the slip walk through a football game. KU had some breaks and they were lucky to escape. But after those games and the loss to Baylor, had a close call against Oklahoma a week before where they win 37-33. And that was the prime time, Paul Dawson, pick six, Gus Johnson screaming like this team's for real. First win over Oklahoma in Big 12 play. The coming out party for TCU football. They're number 9. They're ranked number 9 in the country going to Waco for that matchup against Baylor, who was number 5 at the time, and went toe-to-toe with them. They blew everybody else out. I mean, I know like it's SMU, but they beat SMU 56-0. They won 30-7 over Minnesota in a game where they didn't play particularly well, but you could tell like they were just a lot better than the Golden Gophers. They destroyed Oklahoma State the week after that loss to Baylor, won that game 42-9. They destroyed Texas Tech 82-7. They beat Texas 48-10. They beat Iowa State 55-3. They ran over Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl, which I know you guys know. That team was so talented and so good. And it's wild to think about because they were 4-8 the year before. There was a lot of discussion before that season about Matt Jokel transferred in from Texas A&M, and people were like, well, maybe he should be the starter because up to that point, Trayvon Boykin's career was an incredible athlete, played some wide receiver, was a backup to Casey Paul Hall, came in and played off and on in that 2013 season between injuries for Casey. And the book on him was great athlete, not necessarily a great QB. And then he turns into arguably the best quarterback in the nation in that 2014 season. Josh Doxson was great. Aaron Green was incredible. That offensive line was amazing. That defense was really, really good. Gave up a ton of points to that Baylor team. But honestly, that defense played lights out for most of the season. Paul Dawson was fantastic. They had a nasty defensive line. Davion Pearson was a monster. They could get after the quarterback. Marcus Mallett was a good line. They were just really, really good on all three levels of the defense. And they gave up points because they played so fast on offense, but they also had games where they were just dominant. And so in my mind, like that team, the Rose Bowl team, as good as they were, I'm not going to say they couldn't have beat Auburn, but Cam Newton was such a force. If you're talking about individual seasons, I know some people say Joe Burrow. In my mind, that Auburn national championship where Cam took Auburn to the national title and they won it, that is the best single season by a QB ever. I know some people will say Joe Burrow, Johnny Manziel had a great year. There's a number of those. But, like, Cam had no skill position players. I think nobody from that team other than Nick Fairley played in the NFL. There wasn't a receiver or running back on that team that recorded a reception or a rushing attempt in the NFL. Like that was not a great football team. Gene Chizik was their head coach. It was Cam Newton or bust, and he got it done. So it's hard for me to see. I think they could have done it, but if I had to bet on neutral field between that Rose Bowl team and Auburn, I probably would have gone with Auburn, if I'm being completely honest. We all know what happened last year against Georgia. That 2014 team, I think, would have won the national championship against Ohio State. And I know Ohio State was playing so well. You know, they rolled over Wisconsin. They beat Alabama. They beat Oregon with Cardale Jones. And so I know Ohio State fans think it's crazy. I also realize there is no easier thing for a fan to do. There's probably no better position for a fan to be in than the position of you didn't actually get to play in the big game, but you get to just project what would have happened if you did. Meaning it's an impossible argument for TCU fans to lose because we saw how good that 2014 team was. We know how good they were, and they didn't get to play on the biggest stage because of, the one true champion, no conference title game in the Big 12, and that loss, ultimately the loss to Baylor head-to-head at McLean Stadium. But they were dominant against so many teams, and they were so good. I think they would have beaten Ohio State and won a national title. I know they would have had to win a playoff game before that, either against Alabama or Florida State or Oregon. I don't think they were losing to anybody. At the end of the year, with the exception of that KU game, which I think was just a mental thing, they were dominant. They were good on both sides of the line. That was a physical football team. O-line and D-line were fantastic. Had plus skill talent, like some of the best skill talent in the nation. Had an elite quarterback who could make things happen with his legs and with his arm. They checked all the boxes. Good secondary. I mean, they checked every box for a national championship winning team. And I firmly believe they would have gotten it done if pass interference was called in that play, or if they could just found a way to hold on and keep that lead after going up by 21 in the fourth quarter. And they didn't, and we all know the story. But, I mean, in some ways, I think here's another fascinating perspective for me. I came away from that Baylor loss. I remember I'm going much longer on the segment than I expected to, so sorry. But my mom's a Baylor grad. And so that game was during fall break weekend. And so I rode down with my friend, or we rode down together to my house, crashed at my house, and then my buddy Graydon took me to the game, and then he was going back to Dallas, for the long weekend, and I was going to hitch a ride back with my parents to their place, where I would stay until Monday or Tuesday or whenever school went back. And so TCU loses. I didn't watch the kick go through, but as soon as he kicked it, I knew it was going in. And so I walked down and I walked through the crowd of people, and I wasn't sitting with my parents. I was sitting up in the stands, and my parents were down in that berm area. And I get to where my dad is, and I'm like, all right, let's go. And my dad's like, your mom rushed the field. So my mom, my lovely mother, got caught up in the excitement. And I mean, she's a huge football fan. My love for football comes from her. And so she got caught up in the excitement of her team having that magical comeback, and she rushes the field. And then I had to stand there on the field or close adjacent to the field while all these Baylor people were taking selfies and talking about how it was the best day of their life. It wasn't my favorite experience, but I say that to tell you, I just remember coming away from that football game thinking, okay, that was an awful loss, but they went toe-to-toe with Baylor, who at the time, even though TCU fans would hate this, at the time they were kind of the standard of the conference, right? They went toe-to-toe on the road with Baylor. They beat Oklahoma the week before. This is going to be a really good team. And this is going to be a loss that you say, man, wish we would have won that, but kind of a cool moment to just have a lead in that game and show that you're one of the best teams in the Big 12. And we'll probably look back and they'll win 10 games. Well, I was wrong. That was their only loss that season. They destroyed everyone else. And so part of me wonders, if that loss doesn't happen, at some point during the year, does the team slip up because of, not having that motivation, or motivation might be the wrong word, but it's hard to go undefeated, right? And so at some point, do they get tripped up if they don't have that loss? But I ultimately think they went out and they win the national championship because they were just so good. And that was such a heartbreaking defeat because, I mean, they had it right there. But, it happened. And I think the team used that to catapult them to a historic season after that. When we come back, we'll discuss another what if. What if a key player from the 2021 team stuck around and didn't transfer and was part of last year's team? We'll discuss that next. This is Locked On Horned Frogs. I do want to talk about FanDuel, though. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now, and you can get up to $200 in bonus bets for MLB games. Second half of the MLB season just started off. Rangers get a sweep of the Guardians. They're playing the Rays in a huge AL matchup this week. If you know sports, if you know baseball, you're listening to this podcast because you love sports. Why not try to make some money off of it? Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and win or lose in your first bet. You can place a bet as small as $5, and win or lose, you can get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's $200 that you can use to bet on just the money line, over-unders, parlays. You can get creative with it. Or if, you're someone who's not really familiar with what's going on in this world, you can just kind of dip your toe in the water and keep it pretty simple. FanDuel.com/lockedon. They also have a safe, secure, and easy to use app. It's easy to navigate. I know some of you are like, man, I don't want to download another app. I get that. I get tired of, things crowding my phone, but this one is safe, simple, and easy to use, and it can make you money, which is what we all want. FanDuel.com/lockedon. And that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. They're an official betting partner of Major League Baseball. They're also the official betting partner of the NBA and the NFL. And they're a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. FanDuel, it's where the game starts. Okay, so if you want to submit a TCU football what if, you can do it down here in the comments on YouTube. You can do it at SimcockSteven on Twitter, at LockedOnTCU on Twitter. Also, and let me know what you think about, that 2014 team, that season, that amazing run that the Frogs went on. But I had another submission from Colin Burns, who was a listener, and thanks to him for listening to the show. And this one kind of caught my eye. It was a little more off the beaten path than some of the others that were kind of more obvious. And so I thought I'd talk about it today because I think there's a couple different angles that you could go with from this. He said, what if Zach Evans didn't transfer? And it's kind of wild to think about it, but when Sonny Dykes was hired, that was sort of like topic number one for a lot of TCU fans is who's going to stick around? Is Zach Evans going to stick around? Are they going to be able to hold on to him? Because he was unquestionably, the most talented player on the team. 5-star recruit, North Shore High School, came in with a ton of accolades, very strange recruitment, committed to Georgia, actually signed with Georgia, then gets out of his letter of intent and ends up at TCU, right? And through his 2 years at TCU, his freshman season, which was a COVID year, 54 attempts, 415 yards, 7 yards carry. Sophomore year, 92 attempts, 648 yards, 7 yards carry. And so for his career, he was a guy that averaged 7 yards every time I touched the ball. And you saw the talent there. The frustrating thing about Zach's career at TCU was he just wasn't on the field a lot. And some of it was injury related. And sometimes Zach, to be honest, would take himself out of games when he'd tap his helmet and leave the game, right? And so you never feel like you got the full experience of who he was. But there was a lot of excitement about, okay, if this guy comes in and has a great offensive coach and is really down for, the team concept and down to do whatever Sonny Dykes and Garrett Riley want, then he could have an outstanding season. Well, he ends up transferring to Ole Miss, but what if he stayed? And so I think there's two different paths that this could have gone down. One is he could have been amazing, right? Like he could have had a great season, rushed for over 1,500 yards, a lot of touchdowns, catching the ball in the backfield. Kendre Miller would have been a nice compliment to his ability. That TCU has a huge belief in running the football. I think it could have gone another way, though. And I am not going to – like Zach Evans was by all accounts, handled everything the right way in his time in school. There was no reports of him being a distraction while I was at TCU or at Ole Miss. Now, I went to Ole Miss and had a nice season. Had 936 yards, 6.5 yards carry, 9 touchdowns. So did his job, did really well. Ends up getting selected by the Los Angeles Rams. There's a true freshman at Ole Miss who had a great season as well, and Zach kind of split carries with him and eventually was running back number 2 there in Oxford. But the Rams are taking a chance on him, or not really taking a chance. I mean, they see the talent, they see the ability. And I think Zach, without knowing this, it's kind of unfair to say, but I feel like Zach Evans has always had his mind on the NFL. There's nothing wrong with that. I feel like he has made a conscious effort to not overwork himself in the college game. And so I feel like if he stayed, Amari DiMercato probably leaves. Maybe not. I mean, maybe Amari just says, you know what, I got one more year of eligibility left. I'm probably not going to get a ton of carries, but that's been my career, and I'll stick it out. But either way, I think if that happens, one kind of random domino of that is that Amari DiMercato probably leaves and is probably not on the Arizona Cardinals roster right now because he had an outstanding season as a compliment to Kendre Miller. Kendre Miller obviously has a very different season and is most likely not drafted nearly as highly. But I'll say this about Kendre, and I can't really say this definitively about Zach because he wasn't here last season. I think Kendre Miller brought a toughness to the team and kind of embodied like a culture of toughness that they embraced and physicality they embraced last year that spurred them to a lot of wins. And I mean, Zach Evans was willing to run over people, but you just also had the fact that he wasn't always on the field. And Kendre missed some time last year too. Missed some time due to injury. Really, the second half of the season was banged up. It's a physical position. It's part of it. But I feel like it worked out how it should have. I mean, I can't say for sure that things would have been much different if Zach Evans wasn't on the field. I think he's one of the few guys that would have gone toe-to-toe from a talent perspective with that Georgia roster. But I believe Kendre Miller was the perfect running back for what they wanted to do last year. And I think Amari DiMercato was a great compliment to that. And they got the guys they needed in that backfield to make that running game work. And I believe if the staff was really honest about it, they would say the same thing. But that was a good suggestion by Colin, and I want to talk about that as well. So we'll take one more break, and then we'll come back. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. Through the month of July, we are doing a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule on Locked On Horned Frogs. So we'll be going 3 days a week. On Wednesday's episode, I am planning to talk to Doug from the YouTube channel, The Coordinator Project. If you never visited this YouTube channel before, he breaks down like the evolution of offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators and kind of looks at, okay, what do they do well? What have they done in the past? How have their philosophies changed? He had a really good video comparing like the chess match between Garrett Riley and Dave Aranda and that TCU Baylor game last season. He also has a really in-depth and good video about Kendall Briles and sort of how Kendall has worked his way through the ranks from his time at Baylor to now. And so I'm going to discuss Kendall Briles' offense with him, his philosophies, how it lines up with what Sonny Dykes does, and what TCU's offense has the potential to be this upcoming season. That's coming Wednesday here on Locked On Horned Frogs. Friday, we'll get back to more of those what-ifs. So if you want to submit that on YouTube, on Twitter, you can do it. Again, it's Locked On Horned Frogs, and it's your team every day.